Alright, I'm Blaze, and welcome to episode 6 of Claude Code from Zero. Today we're going to talk about MCP. So just like everything we've talked about in this series so far enabled Claude to work across your local system, you can also enable it to work across the services you use across the web if they offer an MCP server. So all MCP really is just a standardized protocol for models to communicate. Um, and in the scope of like services you're going to be using for Claude Code, just understand that it's a way for you to interact with whatever service you're targeting's APIs and stuff, or rather for the model to interact with that without you having to do a lot of like boilerplate setup with like SDKs and stuff like that. This will just expose endpoints and things that the model can use in a standardized way. So if you decide to change to a different provider, like if you didn't like Claude Code and you wanted to use Cursor or something like that, the configurations for these would work roughly the same, and you can still interact with the services you use every day. So for me, I mainly at home use the GitHub MCP because all my projects are version controlled through GitHub, and I use the Supabase because that's usually my database provider, just because it's nice and easy for personal projects. And so I'm not going to go too deep in what MCP is. Maybe I'll do a dedicated series on that at some point. But for the scope of Claude Code, you can basically just think of them as plugins to interact with web providers and stuff like that. So as an example, let's kind of look at how you can check MCPs. So we will go and open up a terminal. I'll run Claude. And then if you have MCP configured and you want to see what's like kind of going on with that, you can run a /MCP. And then as you'll see, I just have GitHub and Supabase right now because those are really the only two I use at home that often, at least on this machine. But if I wanted to add some more, then I would see them here. Also, you'll see that it says user MCPs. So just like everything else in the composables, you can also configure MCPs at the project or the user scope. Since I use these across tons of projects, I just keep it in my user scope. One thing to note about MCPs is they are contextually expensive. So I wouldn't have a ton of MCP servers just floating around if you're not actually using them. They are pretty robust. But the upside to that is that they end up giving you like way better functionality than just like a CLI or stuff most of the time. Like for instance, my database, I could use the Supabase CLI and the agent can use it as well. But you get way better results when you use the MCP because it just has way more information to work with and it's structured better for the model. Um, but yeah, there's not really a lot to cover with MCP other than if I run context, you'll be able to see some of the tools that it exposes. Like you can see all these are MCP tools that are loaded in. So I could do all these different Supabase things. Like I can list organizations, I can search my documents. And then on the GitHub side, like I can create repositories, create pull requests, update files, all this stuff. And so these are really quick, usable functions. One thing to note too is that the context for MCP actually pretty recently got more efficient. So it used to be that MCPs got preloaded, like the Claude MD pattern, and that's really expensive because some of these are pretty big. But now, if it's more than like 10% or something like that, it actually has this thing called tool search. And so it'll load the base MCP, but it'll tool search these tools as needed. If it needs to use that specific tool, it'll go get more information. So you do save context in the sense that the tools themselves are mostly lazy loaded at this point. Other than that, I guess I could kind of show you how you would go about configuring one. I'm not gonna actually add one because I don't feel like it. But if you wanted to, the best approach is just to go to whatever provider who you want to use their MCP. I usually just Google, like to pull this up, I said Supabase MCP and it was the first result. And they should have a guide pretty much walking you through how to do it. But the big thing you're looking for is this payload here. You can copy paste that, and then as you can see, you need the API token. So whatever your provider you're trying to configure, just go to wherever in their interface you create an API token. Obviously, I'm not going to show you that, but create your secret token, save it. Usually what I do is I just open up a terminal and I go vim, say mcp dot json. Looks like I might have been doing something. And then insert. Oops, wrong one. Come on, Vim. I can't use a paste because it's on my clipboard. Okay, so anyways, I would save it in a file, and then I would go get my token, and I could just I could just go over here and paste it in. And then I would save that file. We'll say that I added my token. I'm not going to actually do it, obviously. I'll run Claude. And then I'll just go mcp.json. I would attach it, and I would say add this MCP server to my user or project, whatever you prefer. And then usually Claude does fine just doing it by itself. And then if you run into any issues, a lot of times in the docs, you can just figure out what's going on. Like sometimes it'll put it in a JSON object instead of putting it in a JSON array when it adds it to your servers. But usually it's a pretty straightforward fix. And honestly, the last 2 or 3 times I've done it this way, it's worked just fine. So there's that. But yeah, so pretty short video on this one. In general, MCPs are just plugins that extend the abilities of your Claude to use online services and kind of provide a standardized way to interact with those. But these are super powerful too. There's also a lot out there that will kind of augment Claude, like people have written libraries to help with memory or help with context management. Like Super Claude is one that a lot of people use. So that's worth reading around too. But as far as configuring them and using them, this is pretty much how it works. The tools just become available once you configure the server. But yeah, hope this helps. I think we're going to do one more episode, but I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.